Shalom Aleichem Search Committee of the Great Neck Synagogue. Thank you so much for considering my candidacy for the position of Associate Rabbi in your shul. I'd like to share with you a brief Dvar Torah regarding this upcoming Shabbos, Shabbos Hagadol. And many ask the question, where does Shabbos Hagadol get its title from? Where does this title derive? Where is it derived from? So some say it's Shabbos Hagadol, meaning it's a reference to the Gadol of the community, the great one of the community, meaning the rabbi who holds forth annually on the Shabbos before Pesach, instructing the people how to prepare for the holiday, how to appreciate the holiday. So it's called Shabbos Hagadol, meaning a reference to the Rav of the community, the great one of the community who gives his annual drasha on the Shabbos. Some say it derives from the Haftorah that we read on Shabbos Hagadol, taken from the book of Malachi, where the prophet tells the Jewish people in the name of God that God says, I'm going to send you Eliah Navi, the prophet Elijah, Lifnei ba Yom Hashem Hagadol v'Hanora, before the great and awesome day at the end of history, of the great and awesome day of God comes at the end of history. God says, before that day, I'm going to send you Eliah Navi, Elijah the prophet. But I think perhaps the most famous answer to this question is that it's a reference to the Nes Gadol, the great miracle that occurred on this Shabbos, back in the original Pesach, the original year of Yetzias Mitzrayim. The pasuk in Parshas Bo says, Moshe and Aaron tell the Jewish people, Be'asor lachodesh hazeh, on the 10th of this month, meaning the month which eventually become known as Nisan, v'chulem ish sel beis avo sel bayis, that the Jews should already on the 10th of Nisan obtain and take the sheep which they're going to slaughter 4 days hence, already take it on the 10th of Nisan in preparation for slaughtering it on the 14th of Nisan, which was halacha which applied only that original Pesach Mitzrayim, and not in Pesach Doros, not in future years, but it was a unique halacha for that first Pesach. And our rabbis explained this was done in order to take it and to ensure that it didn't have any blemishes, so they had enough time to inspect it, etc. But our tradition tells us that the Jews took the sheep, which was the deity of the Egyptians, that's the god of the Egyptians, or one of the gods of the Egyptians, in full view of their former slave masters. And the Egyptians said, hey, what are you guys doing? And the Jews replied, we're taking the sheep to sacrifice it in a 4 days' time as a sacrifice to our God, the true God. And of course, the Egyptians were very angry at this, and they wanted to harm the Jews. And miraculously, God protected the Jews from their former master's wrath, and the Egyptians were not able to touch or harm the Jews. So as a remembrance to this Nes Gadol, this great miracle that occurred that year on the 10th of Nisan, which happened to have been a Shabbos, so in perpetuity, we celebrate the Shabbos, or we commemorate this miracle on the Shabbos before Pesach annually, and we call the Shabbos before Pesach Shabbos Hagadol in commemoration of this Nes Gadol that occurred over 3,000 years ago in Egypt. But a lot of the commentaries are bothered by the question, why do we celebrate this miracle annually on the Shabbos before Pesach, irrespective of the calendar date of that Shabbos? After all, the verse in Parshas Bo emphasizes the calendar date, the 10th of Nisan, right? Take Be'asor lachodesh v'yichulem ish sel beis avos, right? So that year, the 10th happened to be a Shabbos, but it would make sense to celebrate it on the date that the verse itself emphasizes, which is the calendar date, the 10th of Nisan. Why do we celebrate it annually on the Shabbos before Pesach, irrespective of what calendar date that Shabbos happens to be? So some want to say, the Aruch HaShulchan I believe, says that, well, there's other big events that took place on the 10th of Nisan in Jewish history. Miriam Anavia passed away, and then a year after that, the Jews miraculously crossed the Yarden River, the Jordan River split, and they walked across on dry land, entering into the promised land, into the land of Israel. So since these other events took place on the 10th of Nisan, we reserve specifically the Shabbos before Pesach to commemorate this event. But that really still begs the question. I mean, after all, historically, this event occurred first, and why celebrate it on a date that the pasuk itself doesn't emphasize? We should as opposed to celebrating on the correct calendar date. So I saw a very beautiful answer to this question from the great Hasidic Rebbe, the Shem Yishmael. He answers very beautifully. He says like this. He says that it's not just coincidence that year that the 10th of Nisan happened to fall out on Shabbos. That in fact Shabbos was an essential ingredient in allowing the Jews to do that incredibly courageous action that they did. After all, they're taking the deity of their former masters. So what gave them the koach to act so brazenly and with such self-sacrifice to fulfill God's command. The Shem Shmuel says it's the fact that it was Shabbos and that a Jew on Shabbos is spiritually elevated. He's not the same as he is during the week. He's spiritually elevated and is closer to God. And it's specifically this koach, the koach of Shabbos, that allowed the Jews to do such a courageous act and such an act of self-sacrifice to fulfill God's command to take their master's deity and say, we don't care what you think, we're going to sacrifice it to the real God. And yes, of course, it's true at that point in history, the Jews had not been formally commanded regarding Shabbos, but the Midrash says already in Egypt, the Jews used to treat Shabbos differently. They used to gather together and rest and read from scrolls because that was the tradition that they had from their forefathers, from the Avos, who kept the entire Torah. They kept all the mitzvahs, including Shabbos. So this was the tradition embedded already in the Jewish people, even at the time of Egypt. So the Shem Shmuel says it was that koach. It wasn't incidental. It was the koach of Shabbos which gave them the ability to do what they did. And in fact, he points out, even halachically speaking, the halacha views a Jew on Shabbos differently than it views a Jew during the week. The halacha is, if you ask an Am Aretz, an ignorant Jew who is not ordinarily trustworthy or scrupulous about tithing produce, and you ask him, this produce which you just gave me, if you ask him during the week, you say, is it tithed? And he says, yes, it is. You're not allowed to believe him. But if you ask that same Am Aretz on Shabbos, this produce that you just gave me, did you take off meiser? Is it tithed? And he answers, yes, you're allowed to believe him on Shabbos. And the Gemara says, why so? Gemara says very beautifully, because Emas Shabbos halav, the aim of Shabbos is on even this simple Am Aretz, who you would not believe during the week in terms of whether he took off meiser, but on Shabbos, he is spiritually uplifted, and he would not lie to you. He's Neman on Shabbos. So very beautiful idea in terms of the koach of Shabbos and why specifically we celebrate in perpetuity this miracle henceforth on Shabbos, not on the 10th. We don't celebrate on the 10th of Nisan annually. We say we celebrate on Shabbos, the Shabbos before Pesach, irrespective of the calendar date, because it's specifically the koach of Shabbos, the Shem Shmuel said, which gave the Jews, which uplifts a Jew and gave them back in the day the ability, and gives us currently the ability to do what we have to do to fulfill God's command and not worry about what other people are going to say or how they're going to look askance at us, but to do what we have to do. That's all comes from the koach of Shabbos, the fact that Shabbos elevates us and gives us the ability to be moser nefesh, to sacrifice, to fulfill God's word. Very beautiful, powerful idea. And of course, we often take Shabbos for granted. It comes around every week, obviously. But this Shem Shmuel should cause us to think, wow, what an amazing koach Shabbos has, this gift that we have every week, the ability to connect to God, to unplug from the workday, to raise ourselves up spiritually, and to really come closer to God. And a beautiful idea that the Shem Shmuel is giving us in terms of the koach of Shabbos. So in that vein, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you again so much for considering my candidacy for the position of Associate Rabbi in your shul. And Chodesh Tov and Chag Kosher V'Samech. All the best. Thanks again.